I think Netanyahu is a very clever and cunning politician, both domestically in Israel as well as vis-a-vis the United States. And Bibi Netanyahu pulls a lot of strings in the U.S. political system here, including in Congress. And so I do think this is something that Bibi Netanyahu led Donald Trump to do. And Donald Trump, I think, just followed it, and he believes that it's going to, in fact, generate additional support for him. Bibi Netanyahu's poll numbers in Israel supposedly have gone up since these strikes took place. And I think Donald Trump was attracted to that same opportunity. So that's why he decided to join in.
We're waking up to Donald Trump putting on social media Bullseye. Is it as straightforward, John, in your view, as Bullseye?
Yeah, very unpresidential, very bellicose. In many respects, he's spiking the football, unfortunately. And I really think that what we should be doing now is looking for ways to ensure that this is not going to lead to a broader conflict. But bellicose rhetoric coming from Washington does not help the situation.
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Can you drop bombs of that scale on Iran and effectively walk away? That feels like that almost what the administration wants to do. Say, we've dealt with the problem, we'll move on to the next thing. Is that possible, do you think?
No, because it hasn't addressed the underlying problem and issue, which is Iran's nuclear program, which unfortunately the Trump administration during the Trump's first term tore up basically the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that prohibited Iran from enriching uranium at Fordow, which was the principal target of the U.S. Bombing campaign. So I don't think he can walk away. But unfortunately, the option to use military might, which Bibi Netanyahu, I think, has really emphasized when you look at Gaza and you look at Iran, it may be cathartic, impressive military demonstration of power. But again, what's the end game? What are we actually trying to accomplish that's going to address, again, the outstanding issue?
And what do you think the end game is? I mean, he mentioned also overnight on his social media post, as well as Bullseye, he mentioned regime change.
Yeah, I don't think Donald Trump really knows what he wants. I think he just knows that he doesn't like the Iranian regime right now. He doesn't like the Iranian nuclear program. But I don't think he's thought through strategically exactly how best to achieve those aims. The military option is an easy one. The United States military has very, very impressive capabilities. And so it was an easy choice. But now we have a very uncertain future in terms of how Iran is going to respond and what will be the fate of that nuclear program. And we don't even know how extensive the damage was and whether or not there has been irreparable damage done to the Iranian facilities and the status of the HEU, the highly enriched uranium. So there's just a lot of questions still to be addressed.
Is it possible that Iran is more of a nuclear threat now, with this action having been taken? I mean, in terms of putting together a unsophisticated device, if they've managed to keep some of their uranium somewhere else?
Well, some people argue that. I don't think the Iranians want to go down a path that's going to almost ensure their destruction, because certainly the U.S. military can do a lot more damage in Iran. And I never believed that the Iranians were really close to developing a nuclear weapon. Ever since 2003, that program has been suspended by the analysis of the U.S. intelligence community. I think that analysis and assessment is shared by our British colleagues and others. So also, even if Iran were to try to sprint to develop some type of warhead, I think it certainly would be detected and actions would be taken to prevent it coming to fruition. But I also cannot even envision a scenario wherein Iran would want to carry out some type of first strike nuclear attack against Israel. With Israel's very large arsenal of nuclear weapons, that would ensure the annihilation of Iran in no short order.
So why did this happen then, John? Why now? Why this? If the threat was not looming, why did this happen?
Well, because Bibi Netanyahu, over the years, has overstated the threat from the Iranian nuclear program. He has wanted to destroy that program for quite some time. And I do think he was able to convince Donald Trump to take this action now. I think Bibi Netanyahu fully anticipated when he decided to launch attacks against Iran that ultimately it would come to this. He knew that the Israeli Defense Forces, as good as they are, didn't have the capability to conduct these strikes deep underground at Fordow. And so he was going to be expecting the momentum was going to build and the pressure was going to build on Donald Trump to join in, particularly since it's been so effective. And I do think Donald Trump, just was enticed into doing this. And there are some war hawks inside of the U.S. government and Congress and Republican Party who I think encouraged him to go down this path. So again, this was, I think, a needless action. There could have been steps taken. There were ongoing negotiations with the Iranians, but clearly, I think the Iranians were being misled by Donald Trump over the last several weeks.
Was he played by Netanyahu, do you think?
Well, I think he was. I think Netanyahu is a very clever and cunning politician, both domestically in Israel as well as vis-a-vis the United States. And Bibi Netanyahu pulls a lot of strings in the U.S. political system here, including in Congress. And so I do think this is something that Bibi Netanyahu led Donald Trump to do. And Donald Trump, I think, just, followed it. And he believes that it's going to, in fact, generate additional support for him. Bibi Netanyahu's poll numbers in Israel supposedly have gone up since these strikes took place. And I think Donald Trump was attracted to that same opportunity. So that's why he decided to join in.
What do we make of the sort of unilateralism of America these days? We saw him sort of walk away from the G7. In this country, there's quite a lot of soul searching about how little Britain were involved, not consulted, they didn't need to use air bases connected to Britain. Is America kind of a lone hawk now, a lone force in the world, less of a collegiate player?
I think certainly under the Trump administration it is. Donald Trump doesn't like multilateral fora. He doesn't like to diffuse U.S. influence. So he likes to deal one-on-one with countries, and he likes to do things unilaterally. So the United States under Donald Trump is much different than it has been under previous presidents, even before. Trump 1.0 was different, but I do think this America First agenda, whether you talk about tariffs or trade or other types of things, it demonstrates that Donald Trump is basically not following any of the normal practices or norms and is going to go it alone, believing that he knows best. And he's, I think, dealing the way he dealt with his real estate, firm in New York. He is going to use as much intimidation, coercion, pressure, and so on to get his way.
So what happens next in your view? I mean, it's impossible to tell with any great degree of certainty. But from Iran's point of view, they could close the Straits of Hormuz, which would affect oil prices. It would affect China very significantly. They could do nothing, but you've got to imagine the regime will want to do something. They could hit American bases, which would presumably be a suicidal thing for them to do. What do you think Iran will do next?
I think they're having this very debate right now. I think they feel that they have to respond in some way just to demonstrate that they are not going to just lie down and take these strikes. But at the same time, I don't think they want this to trigger some type of broader U.S. military operations against Iran. So I think they're debating the different options they have. They could use conventional, strikes against U.S. Targets in the Gulf region. Could use terrorist operations, cyber attacks, other types of things. So maybe the more likely one is to go after U.S. troop presence inside of Iraq. They've done that before. They have a militia presence there. But I don't think they're going to go all out. I don't think we're going to see a hail of missiles, heading to Gulf states. I don't think the Iranians want to alienate the Qataris and the Saudis and Emiratis who have criticized these strikes. And I don't think they're going to close off the Strait of Hormuz. But they will do something. It's just a question of what they decide ultimately to do.
Just finally, are we closer to world war because of this? Is the world more of an unstable place because of what's happened in the last 24 hours?
Well, it's certainly unstable. Israel has long said that Iran has been an existential threat to Israel's survival. Well, I think Iran views Israel as a very serious existential threat to its survival. And clearly, Israel has been the aggressor in this conflict. Could it spin out of control? Yes, it could. There could be some scenarios whereby there's going to be some type of action that may lead to a lot of deaths, American citizens, diplomats, personnel, or whatever, that could then lead to an escalation. But at this point, I don't think we're on that track. But again, I think it's too early to tell exactly what's going to happen in the next several chess moves.
Very considered response there from John Brennan, the director of the CIA under President Obama. Let's bring in the Times foreign correspondent Richard Spencer. Morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Argument there from John Brennan that Donald Trump has been played by Netanyahu, that Israel always wanted this and got what they wanted.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any real doubt about that. Netanyahu is the most skilled international leader of our time. He's been doing it for 30 years. I wrote a piece last week harking back to how he played Tony Blair in the early years of the Tony Blair prime ministership in Britain. I mean, incredible to think, isn't it, that Netanyahu was prime minister of Israel before Tony Blair became prime minister, if you can think back all that time. And Netanyahu played Blair very cleverly over Blair's positioning on the Middle East when he first became prime minister. Netanyahu grew up in America partly. He's known a lot of the players in America since he was a young man. He was way back, he was deputy ambassador to the US before he went into politics. He has a consultancy background at the very start of his career in America. He understands how the American political system operates, and he plays it very neatly.
So what happens next? An impossible question, but if Iran were to, maybe you can just clear up this for us, Richard, because a couple of our listeners have asked this over the course of the last week or so. If Iran were to take steps to hit an American base somewhere, presumably they'd do it via a proxy and not do it overtly. If they did it overtly, does NATO get called in? Does that trigger off NATO obligations, do you know?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I'm not an international lawyer, but I think for NATO for the NATO Article 5 to be triggered, it has to be an attack on sovereign territory, an unprovoked attack on a sovereign territory of a member state. Which was why it was called in after 9/11. It could take direct action. If you remember, after Trump killed Qasem Soleimani, the very important, most important Iranian general in 2020, Iran attacked two military bases with missiles in Iraq, including bases where British soldiers were situated, and that was a kind of organized escalation, as you sometimes see in these conflicts. Iran knew it had to retaliate. America was expecting retaliation. It wasn't an all-out attack. It was a bunch of missiles. It didn't kill anybody, and so the Americans said, "Well, we'll take the win. We got rid of Soleimani, and we haven't lost anyone, so we'll take the win." Trump's in a much more bellicose mood at the moment, so that would be much riskier. So as John Brennan said, it's probably not what they're going to do unless there's some sort of weird backroom negotiation on it. The other option is proxies in Iraq firing missiles at those bases. The all-out attack would be missile strikes on US bases in the Gulf, but that would be the sort of suicide button, I think. My own view is that they won't do anything just yet. I think you'll probably see a lot more proxy activity in the months to come, much more reliance on asymmetric warfare, if you like, terrorism perhaps, attacking Israeli targets, Jewish targets, and in a more deniable way.
Just finally, where's China in all of this? If Iran does decide to close the Straits of Hormuz, that would affect China more than anyone else. China has condemned the American action, but not in particularly strong terms. What happens with China, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, China's been sidelined by this rather. I mean, there's an ambiguity in the relationship between America and China, which is, I think I said to you the other day, isn't quite parallel. They do things in different ways. So on the one hand, in the sort of short term to medium term, I mean, it looks quite bad for China, really. It's been trying to get involved in the Middle East. It's forged relations with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. It was the host for a deal between those two countries. And yet here it is. No one's talking about it. It's not involved in the negotiations. It issues these appeals for calm, which everyone ignores. On the other hand, in the longer term, America still doesn't look very stable when it does these things, when it offers, 2 weeks to consider and then bombs after 2 days. As you say earlier, as John Brennan said, it seems to be somewhat in the pocket of Bibi Netanyahu. China sets its own policy, goes its own course. I think it's less dependent on Iranian oil. It's very pleased to get cheap Iranian oil, which it does at the moment, but it's not an absolutely overwhelming part of its energy supplies.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens. I mean, the test of what Iran does next, and that could include trying to close the Straits from Hormuz. We'll see if that happens. Richard, good to speak to you as ever. Thank you so much for joining us.